So hopefully this mic working. Hello everyone, it's great to be here. Thanks to my friends at Startupbootcamp who I followed their journey this entire time and have been involved for a couple of years, and really happy to see what they've been doing. So, I figured I would sort of tell you my story and the story of the companies that I've been involved with, and that would sort of, do what we needed to do today. So, I started my career when I was in college in the University of Miami. I was studying computer engineering, and I started working in a bank processing company. This is 1986, and I was 18 years old. And so I sort of cut my teeth in the bowels of old school technology, mainframes and assembly languages. And the first 10 years of my career were all defined by me being an engineer myself. Always wanted to be an entrepreneur though. And I got married very young, and so that sort of set me back in terms of being able to take a lot of risk. But nonetheless, it was really what fueled me. So in the first 6 years of my career, I was involved in financial technology. And then I saw healthcare for the first time because I got hired by a startup to be their head of technology. Now mind you, I was 24 years old, and when you're head of technology in a thinly capitalized entrepreneurial venture, you're really the head programmer. And I was just blown away by healthcare, right? Here I had come from financial services that were very technology enabled, very efficient, even in the 1980s, to now we were in the early 1990s, and we had this healthcare situation, this enormous industry that impacts all of our lives, and this crazy Wild West of inefficiency. And so I really felt like I had found my calling once I started working on the problem. And I worked at this company for a number of years, started having children, I had enrolled in an MBA program, and about 3 years into it, I was like, something's got to give. Working 90 hours a week. My wife is not happy with me. I don't see my kids, and I'm studying, and this is too crazy. So I decided to quit my job, finish the MBA, do consulting to pay the bills, and the idea was that after I would finish that, I would start my first venture. And I got derailed. So as I was finishing the MBA, I got derailed in a good way because I got the opportunity to join some entrepreneurs here locally that started a company called AnswerThink Consulting Group, which is now called the Hackett Group. And AnswerThink was started by the head of KPMG Consulting, raised $20 million of venture capital. And I said to myself, it's a great opportunity to come in the founding team, but more importantly, to see how a real fast startup is done. And so I did that, and over the next 4 years, we went public in a year, listed on the NASDAQ, and I was doing management consulting with large companies all over the world in many different industries. But in 2000, the dot-com bubble burst, and I was honestly lucky to be employed because many of my colleagues were being laid off because there just wasn't enough technology consulting work to go around. But my work went from this very sort of sexy strategy engagements to being very boring stuff. And I'm sort of the type of person that defines themselves by their career and what they're doing, and it just was, for me, it was just unbearable. And so I started working on the business plan that would become my first company. And in October of 2001, I finally quit my job and started working full-time for that company, which was called Avicenna, or it's still called Avicenna. It's still around. And it was a terrifying experience. Here I was, I think I was 32 years old. I had 4 kids. My wife was a school teacher. I was the breadwinner. I had to invest my own capital. I had to go without pay and do things I had never done before, raise money, be a CEO. But through a lot of hard work and a lot of faith, for lack of a better word, I was able to get through it. And in what seemed like an eternity, which was about 6 months, in 2002, raised a couple $1 million of angel investment and then later venture capital. But that transition for me, right, was very important. Because up until that time, I had been sort of gainfully employed by corporate America, either large corporate America or small corporate America. And I wasn't the one that was having to worry about paying the paychecks and raising money and all this kind of stuff. And the moves I made up until that time were defined by me being what I call a creature of logic. You know, I would sort of plot my path, and I would sort of go down that path and execute. But I had to see the destination before I started heading down that path. And in that first entrepreneurial experience, I really sort of became a creature of faith. And what I mean by faith is, I mean faith in yourself, faith in your judgment, right? That your judgment will lead you to what the right opportunity is. And you have to trust your judgment. You can't always collect, in these very complex situations, you can't always collect all the data you need to be able to make a decision. So these big decisions tend to be based on a lot of judgment, on a lot of intuition. And so for me, it was just put yourself in the game, begin executing, and doors will open. If you work hard and you work smart, doors will open, doors that you never imagined. And I can't tell you how many times since that time I've sort of followed that sort of strategy and it's worked. And maybe I've been blessed because of it, but it's always worked out for me. But that was a very, very big transition in my life, and it was a very liberating one. And I mention it because I'm sure to some extent all the entrepreneurs in the room go through a very, very similar mental exercise, right? And so, you know, Avicenna got going. We commercialized the product. We had many, many hiccups along the way. We grew the company. One of the really, really important things that I always stressed in my companies was, you know, look, product is really, really important, and I tend to be a product person first. But the commercialization side is incredibly important. And if you ever want to get funding for your companies, you better really think through that stuff. And especially if you're outside of Silicon Valley. Because I see a lot of sort of Silicon Valley early stage playbooks being sort of prescribed to entrepreneurs outside of Silicon Valley. And I'm like, look, if there's one thing I'm an expert at, is executing entrepreneurship outside of Silicon Valley, raising even Silicon Valley money outside of Silicon Valley. And the playbooks that work in Silicon Valley don't necessarily work in local communities. And so most people want to see how you're going to commercialize the product, not necessarily how you're going to change the world. Changing the world is good, right? But most investors, let's face it, care about making money. And how are you going to make money? And that was always something I focused on. And at Avicenna, we built a sales engine. It was sort of an old school sales engine, but it worked. And we grew the company in excess of 50% every year that I was there. And in 2008, I ended up leaving. And the company's still operational, the company's still growing. But I had just gotten to the point where the venture capitalists were asking me to do things that I just didn't want to do. And so I ended up leaving, off by myself, thinking about what I'm going to do as my next venture. And you know, I realized that healthcare was still this daunting, sort of hairy problem. And call me a glutton for punishment, but I decided to start my second healthcare venture, which is called CareCloud. And so, you know, the way I think about healthcare is, you know, I think the most complex thing in the universe that I know of is the human body. I think most people here would agree with that, right? But probably the second most complex thing in the universe is the US healthcare system. I mean, it is brutal, right? Everything about it is difficult. Just to do the first thing in healthcare is absolutely daunting, right? And a lot of times you find companies that they have a great idea, a great mission, but all the execution leading up to them actually delivering on the product takes forever. And it's very, very expensive, and it consumes a lot of venture capital. So the idea behind CareCloud, which was born in January of 2009, so it was really 2008, was, you know, I had begun using the iPhone and the App Store and all of this, and I said to myself, this is what the world needs, right? The world needs a modern cloud-based underpinning for the healthcare industry. So imagine if entrepreneurs could build applications on top of this very powerful underpinning and not have to worry about all the mundane sort of execution layer of an application, of a software application. And so to do that, the prevailing thought at the time was you had to create the platform, but you also had to create the applications and commercialize them. No different than the iPhone came out, but the App Store came out later, and the iPhone wasn't delivered as a pure device. It had applications like a phone, like email, like text messaging, like all these things. And so we equated those same things to practice management systems, EHR systems, revenue cycle management solutions, patient portals. Those were all of the kind of the killer apps. And in our case at CareCloud, we focused on ambulatory healthcare, right? On the physician offices, which is this highly fragmented, inefficient, somewhat unprofessionally run businesses, right, in many cases. And so that was our focus. And so started the company in January of 2009, put together an initial funding round. So, you know, some of you may not be old enough, but many of us were adults in 2009. We remember what that was like, right? It was sort of like 2001. In 2001, here I was a young, 32-year-old technology entrepreneur. I was a scourge of the economy because we're the guys that had screwed up the dot-com bubble, right? And in 2009, what you had was mortgage bankers, and those guys were the scourge of the economy. But you didn't see a lot of entrepreneurial activity because the economy was terrible. But I felt comfortable, I was a little bit older, felt comfortable that downturns are a good time to start companies. And I had enjoyed a good reputation and a good network. And I can't stress that enough, that anything that you do in entrepreneurship or in life, your integrity is by far the most important thing that you have. People ask me, how did you raise money? And I said, look, it's not about what I did in the period that I was raising money. It's about what I did in the 20 years before it. Making sure that people trusted me. They knew I was going to work hard. They knew I wasn't going to cheat them. And then maybe I didn't succeed every single time, but boy, was I going to really try to succeed. And I can't stress that enough in any community, but certainly not in Miami, that's the way it's got to be done. And so in 2009, incorporated the company, started putting together the funding round, was able to raise $2.8 million in an oversubscribed $2 million round, all from angel investors. All of it in common stock and without giving away any board seats. I heard a statistic once that in the entirety of 2009, there was about $100 million of angel investment in the entire United States. And CareCloud here in Miami was able to accrue almost $3 million of it to the company, which I think was a pretty amazing achievement. A year later, we'd raised another $5 million from angels. So the first $8 million all came from angels. And then in 2010, we were invited by IBM to compete in their SmartCamp competition, which is IBM Venture Capital's venture competition. And I just, by luck of just being in the right place at the right time, I got invited. And that's another sort of lesson I would say is that, if you're trying to do all this stuff from your office, it's not a great thing. You gotta be out there touching people, touching lives. And you never know what opportunity may drop in your lap by doing that. And this opportunity came to me in Barcelona, of all places. And we got invited to compete in their Silicon Valley competition. We were shortlisted from 100 companies down to 5. And we went out there in a grueling 2 days, competing against 4 other Silicon Valley companies in the middle of, sort of a room like this at the Quadras in Santa Hill Road with all the VCs sitting in the room. We ended up winning the day. So we won the competition, and people were like scratching their head going, who are these Miami guys? It's like, where did they come from, and how did they beat the Silicon Valley guys? And so at the time, the VCs are like, look, we love what you're doing, we want to talk to you. And I was like, look, let's keep talking, but right now we don't need your money because we just raised $5 million from angels. And they were like, $5 million, really? Like, yeah. And so there's nothing better if you ever get the opportunity to tell a venture capitalist you don't need their money. It's one of the greatest pleasures in life, right? So, but we kept those relationships warm. And a year later, when it was time to make a decision about the next funding round, I remember sitting with my board and saying, look, I think the time's right. The markets are back. Let's go out and get $10 million. And they're like, really? $10 million? That's going to be very dilutive. What about valuations? What about revenue? And I'm like, look, we got this. but I want to go to the Valley because that's where the best investors are. I had East Coast investors from New York, and nothing against New York or East Coast investors. There's lots and lots of good ones, but my experience at Avicenna with the investors was just not a great one. And so I said, look, I'm going to go hunt for the best. And so that's the other thing I would say is, you got to aim high in all of these things, right? Try to associate yourself with the best people, whether it be the people you work with or the people that invest in your company. Try to go out and get the best. And we went hunting in Silicon Valley. And 3 months later, I came back with a term sheet from Intel Capital. And then Norwest jumped into the party, and we ended up closing an oversubscribed, what started as a $10 million round, became a $20 million round. And we rang the bell. And I think it was the first time, I'm not sure about this, but I think it was the first time a Miami company had secured Silicon Valley venture capital since the dot-com days, since basically the 90, 2000 kind of era. And so we were pretty happy about it. We began executing. Later, we did another round, a larger round later on. And, CareCloud figured out the formula for, again, commercialization. At our peak, we were selling 70, if you think about how difficult is it to sell a medical practice, period, right, on anything. To sell them a life insurance policy, anything is difficult. But to sell them a heart and lung transplant that is, swap out your systems, right? All of it, the practice management, the revenue cycle, the electronic health record, which a lot of them didn't have at that time. It's daunting. And we did it in 50 medical specialties, right? Small, medium, and large practices. But nonetheless, at our peak, we were selling 70 practices a month and piling on about $2 million of recurring revenue every month. So the revenue base would grow and grow and grow and grow. We were executing in excess of 100% growth during that time. And so in 2015, I stepped down as CEO, and I hung out there for another 6 months as the head of strategy. I ended up putting together a deal with PNC Bank and First Data that very, very strategic to CareCloud, related to combining sort of the financial services with the healthcare side at the front desk in the medical practice. And then after about 6 months in soul searching, I said to myself, my job is to sort of start companies and lead people. It's not to be sort of an individual contributor as head of strategy. And so I stepped down as chairman about a year later, and took a little bit of time off, and then started working on 8Base, which is my latest company, which is not necessarily healthcare. It's enterprise software across the board. It's to try to make all this software building really easy. It's a modern platform that allows people of limited or no technical proficiency to build their own enterprise software without developers, right? And so I went back to sort of my core pure engineering roots. But I'm very excited about that, and healthcare is very, very near and dear to my heart. I'm still involved in certain things related to healthcare. And I'm optimistic as to what the new technologies that are headed down the pipe can do to help healthcare. Probably the most important one, the prescient one for me, is blockchain in all of this. Blockchain is a really, really difficult thing to comprehend. And if there's anybody in this room that doesn't feel like they know enough about it, I highly recommend that you look into it, because it has the potential to disrupt almost every business on the planet. And certainly in healthcare, if we think of how inefficient, how absent health records are, how inefficient financial transactions are in healthcare, all this stuff, these are problems that blockchain can really, really help to solve. But like that, there are many things, right? Artificial intelligence and other things that are also going to play into the landscape. So, sort of in closing, what I would say is that couple lessons for me and things that I always try to apply. I don't always get these right? I mess them up as much as I get them right. But, the first one is really surround yourself with the best people. You can't do it all. You got to go out and find the best people in their respective discipline. You may have to relocate them from where they are. If you're insular and you're just looking at the people that's not good enough. You have to find people that challenge what you say, and you have to find the best people and then put them, let them execute. And the other thing is that if you're not a lifelong learner, if you're not a student of the game, if you're not a person who's constantly looking out there and seeing what's changing, how can I apply it, then you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur, because the velocity of change in the world is increasing tremendously. And it used to be that you could start a company and you had a certain amount of time to execute on your idea before the idea went stale. That time is compressing and compressing and compressing. So the speed of execution and understanding, being able to look around corners and predict what's going to happen is incredibly important. So I try to do that myself, no matter how old I get, no matter how comfy I get. I always try to challenge myself to keep looking and keep pushing. And I think it's something that all of us need to do. And then the last thing I would say is, the world has gotten to a point where nothing short of excellence is allowed. If we download an app on our iPhones and it's sort of clunky, we're done. We don't do anything with it. And so attention to detail and excellence is incredibly important in the product and the operation and everything that you do. And once again, if you're not committed to that as an entrepreneur, you better hire somebody who is, because otherwise you're probably just wasting your time and everybody else's. All right? So I think that's about my 15 minutes. Thank you all very, very much. Good luck.